that we had the Indian Institutes of Technology, Indian Institutes of Management, Indian Institutes of Science, Indian Institute of Space Science, Indian Institute of Nuclear Science, and then you look at the literature side, you look at other areas, and the central universities which came up. This country was not a rich country then. Now we have doubled. The Indian Institutes of Technology, you have 9 more. From 7 to 16. This is a reality. Please, allow me to complete. Allow me to complete. Show some respect. Let him, please. A senior lady has asked me a question, don't interrupt. You have every right to ask a question, but interruption should not be encouraged.
Please.
We are elder to you, we have been invited, show that. Now, if you are more than doubling institutes of excellence, I give you the IIT number up to 16. It's not a small jump. IIMs, you have added 7 more, 30 more central universities, 20 triple ITs. These are all public funding. From 1 mega National Institute of Science to 5 National Institutes of Science, 1 NID to 5 NID. After 1963, no National Institute of Design or Science was created. Now this has happened because the state has been able to generate funds and redistribute, and primarily it is happening because of a abiding commitment to inclusive agenda for growth and sustainable development. Similarly, madam, for education, it was, as I gave you the numbers, you can recheck the numbers and revisit them. In 1 decade, the allocation for education, which includes primary education, secondary education and higher education put together, has gone up 8 times from 10,000 crores to 79,800 crores in the national budgetary allocation. So it's a commitment which this country will always keep, irrespective of which government is in office, when it comes to public spending on education and public spending on health. I don't foresee a situation where the Indian state is going to withdraw when it comes to committing public funds for education. At the same time, yes, it's a question of mindset. You have parents coming, they don't want to go to a government institution sometimes. We have also to deal with that. You are teachers, we all have a duty. Same is the case in case of schools. Since my childhood, when I went to a primary school, and I'm sure it happened with you, I grew up in a small town, but there were private schools also, and there were government schools. I went to a Kendriya Vidyalaya. There are many who were better off went to the convent schools. Though I can say that I had good teachers, so I was equally well educated, and which has been recognized, and I'm grateful for that. But the fact is that there is a principle of coexistence, and as countries grow, the countries would invest more, and the institutions, finally in democracies there is also a choice given. I don't see a system where the choice is taken away. At the same time, access to good education, quality education, should be the primary duty and responsibility of a state. We will remain a welfare state for decades and decades to come. I have no doubt in my mind. Even in the rich countries, the developed countries, where effort was made to disengage, particularly at the UK, as I recall under Margaret Thatcher, even on the public sector and other issues, not more than 22% of privatization could take place, and we are conscious of that as public servants, as representatives of the people. So we are accountable first to the people. That is the beauty of Indian democracy, that you hold everyone accountable, as individuals and as institutions. And I'm sure I can reassure you that it's not only my party, I'm speaking now, I think for the country, that this country will not withdraw when it comes to its commitment to quality education and to ensure that children continue to get access to good education, and for which public investments shall have to be made, irrespective of which year and who is in office. There's one question more which I wanted to take, but before that, it's important for me just to correct one or two things. My dear friend perhaps didn't hear my words correctly. and I don't blame it. I don't want to join issues. I did not say that manufacturing is for exports only. Let me correct. India's share in the global trade, services and merchandise exports put together, even today is less than 4%. We barely crossed 2.4% in merchandise exports, though we intend to double it at the earliest, otherwise we will be dependent either on external borrowings. There are only three ways you will get the money. If anybody was building a case that you don't need FDI, I'm sorry, I strongly disagree because I don't need wear the same ideological blinkers. I recognize what is the need. We don't want India to then borrow, the nation to be indebted again. When your own country can invest and your national investment rate reached up to 36%, and that investment is coming, friends, both from the state as well as from the private sector. The contribution of the private sector, much derided or reviled as it may be fairly, sometimes this is trendy and fashionable. But if you look at all the major PPP projects, the private sector participation in investment, their share, has been 27, 28, 29%. And the rest of the investment in all the infrastructure building is coming from the state, it's not coming from the private sector. Now, when we are talking of manufacturing, 45% of India's manufacturing even today is in the SME sector. If you look at the national manufacturing policy, of all the investment incentives, tax incentives, technology incentives, acquisition of technology for which a fund has been created now, HITA, in India, so that the startups or the first generation entrepreneurs, the small entrepreneurs is there, and access to funds and technology is there. The national manufacturing policy has given priority emphasis to SMEs. 40% of India's exports are from SMEs. They are not otherwise. SME manufacturing also goes into major manufacturing, whether it's your automobiles, whether it is your defense manufacturing, because it's small components. Today there is no car made in the world, no car, in which some components are not made by Indian automobile components manufacturers. No car, not only in India, but anywhere in the world. You go to Germany, you go even to China, you go to Japan. I went to BMW manufacturing facility near Berlin during the government dialogue last year. They took me there. 186 components of a new vehicle are coming out of India, and they were proudly telling me, and I was very proud to hear that. So it's a two-way traffic. And also about engaging with the trade. Then you're talking about investing in others' economies. If you don't invite investments, my dear friends, in today's world, we can't say that I will export but I will not import. But you will have to import because you need oil and gas. There may be others who think in their wisdom that you can tomorrow morning go, dig a small hole, and there comes the oil. You stop all the imports. I wish and pray that in my lifetime, India sees that. You have to be pragmatic. It's very easy to stigmatize, but I also believe in one thing, and I must caution. It happens in politics. It's happening more here. Unfair targeting and excessive vilification is injurious to the health of the society and any democracy. We must not make it appear to us that everything is bad and an individual or a group of individuals are repositories of the entire wisdom and knowledge of a nation of 1.25 billion. I must caution you. And if you meet such people, sympathize with them. You must sympathize with them. Because we learn, life is a learning curve, we learn on a daily basis. Nobody can be prescriptive for such a vast country, even for a small village. If you invite citizens in a chopin of a village and say that how to fix a problem, there will be 20 suggestions. There is no one person in a participatory democracy who says my formula and my prescription is the body. You learn and you grow. On defense indigenization, let me tell you, earlier the private sector was not allowed, Indian private sector, now it has been allowed. I am a great votary of defense indigenization, but you also need certain cutting edge technologies which have not been accessible to India for decades, because they were sanctions against our institutions. There were sanctions because of India, our own policies and approach to become self-reliant, particularly in space science, as well as in nuclear technology. So we face sanctions. Today, by and large, the sanctions are not there. We have been able to access technologies and build partnership between our defense PSUs and other private sector entities. Now, if you have, some friend rightly asked a question that if China can be making parts for rocket systems, why shouldn't India be making? We were in America last year, the same Lockheed company, the new helicopter which saw action, the big one, which we got in the Uttarakhand floods. They told us, myself, Monte Carvalho and Chitambaram, all three were there, and our senior officials, that minister, you must know that the entire cockpit and the engine is made by an Indian company in Hyderabad. Let me share that with you. And they said that company is Tata's company. Now we may say that private sector is bad. But they have also over centuries made their own contribution. You have to find a balance. I am fully in agreement with all my co-panelists. You cannot allow monopolies to be created. You cannot allow natural resources to be stolen or given away. Why not? As it happened with other countries when their economies evolved. In case of America, they had a serious problem when they talked of robber barons. That is where the antitrust movement came. Today, if you see the institutions in India, both to fight corruption as well to break down monopolies, today the Competition Commission of India has teeth to bite. The CCI is a reality. It is not a paper tiger. The Security and Exchange Control Board of India, SEBI, has teeth. That's why you have many of the Ponzi scheme guys sitting in prison. This is the truth, including a chief worker of a mega empire created through people's money. So we have enough Indians manning these institutions. The right to information, Prashant has a take, but the fact is that we can take credit. I must say, my dear friend, elections will be over soon. But we have new heroes who are giving 100 marks to themselves and 0 to me. Not fair. Not fair at all. You may say that, well, out of 100, no teacher, if I am a student, then will give me some marks. Give me 0. But if you give it, then I can only sympathize that what has gone wrong here. Now, the right to information has empowered citizens. The first empowering step taken after the right to vote and our framers of constitution took a courageous decision on universal suffrage, when even in European countries, the right to vote for women in many European countries was given in 71 or 72, regular, you are agreeing with me, and others know. After that came the right to information. Then came the Whistleblowers Act. That means making disclosure in public interest in protecting the person making the disclosure. That is a right now. You have to be protected. This is happening because as societies have evolved, so that will happen. So that is changing. Regulatory frameworks and legal frameworks are being put in place. It's not that something has happened overnight. People may try to blame one or the other. I don't want to get into that because I may say that this state, I don't want to go into that. You hear on the TV debates all the time. But what I'm saying, the regulatory frameworks and legal frameworks are being put in place. Other countries have learned it. India has also learned as our economy grows. You have an independent judiciary, a circuit, you have a legislature, you have a free media, quite free, nobody is stopping, competitively free, that's interesting. But the citizens' right and empowerment is fully secured and ensured. And so are the entitlements. The last thing is on this entire theory of trickle down and combining three things together, the social projects and the freebies issue. You see, if you call it freebies, that is the revenue earned and part of the revenue forward, which is very small in percentage terms. But when you look at the social agenda, the social dimension, there's much more money today available and allocated only to the social agenda. We are very clear on that. So even in percentage terms, I'm not talking of subsidies. Even on the scale of 1 to 10, it is a multiple of 5, the subsidies when it comes to what you call the 3 Ds. We are not going to create a system. It's not that people like me or others, it's very easy to bracket some of us, that we are votaries of A or B. For us, it is India which comes first. Everything else is second. If we are entrusted with the responsibility, we will take decisions which are correct, judicious, and for which we must be held accountable. It's very easy to tell you about scams and scams and scams, painting a picture that everybody should be put in one box. I'm very proud of many of my colleagues. I have been in public life for over 4 decades, entire life. Let anybody stand up and say something. They are men and women of integrity also. If others are not, they will be punished and they are being punished. We have social activists, we have systems, we have citizens activists. You get exposed and punished because we created an ecosystem of better awareness, better accountability, and institutional framework and the legal framework. The word corruption didn't come into being in 2004 with the UPA 1. I'm sorry, I strongly disagree, vehemently so. The word corruption has been there in the Chambers and the Oxford Dictionary for centuries. We did not write this word. Don't attribute it wrongly. Now, when it comes to this word in particular, earlier Prashant is a very eminent lawyer. He will at least agree with me here that fighting corruption was only there as part of your Indian Penal Code until the Prevention of Corruption Act became a reality. We were moved from there to other institutions of accountability, and this is a journey which will continue. The worst crime which we can ever think of doing is to undermine the self-confidence of a very great nation. You will have good people, you may have some bad apples, isolate the bad apples, but don't say that in one particular crop, in one particular state or one institution, everybody is bad. That is an unfair indictment which should be best avoided because it's unethical. And we are conscious of the social dimensions. That's why I said, and I must share this, my last 3 sentences with you. When we conceptualized the National Manufacturing Policy, it was January 2010, the first Saturday of the year. I was in Jaipur when I announced India will have a National Manufacturing Policy. Because I was talking to people, I was talking to institutions, and I was shocked that why did my country does not have we had an industrial policy, we don't have a national manufacturing policy. And more compelling reason was the social dimension. And we have 15 million young Indians joining the workforce every year, 150 million in 10 years. Services are growing, but services cannot give you so many jobs. Manufacturing is the multiplier. On the strength of manufacturing, the services will grow. So the priority became manufacturing. And finally, when we pushed it, and I can share it with you very proudly. Within the government, they were bruising metals because people never wanted to let go of the turfs. We had today now a policy in place with single window approval, where the land is not being handed over to investors or foreign or private sector. The land will remain with the state, concerned state governments, never to be alienated, were to be made available for manufacturing on a global lease or rental basis. We gave the final push to the manufacturing, and I can tell you, I was abroad. When I read in the newspapers and in the global media, there was a recruitment camp for 100 positions of constables in the ITBP. This was in Bareilly. The recruitment was cancelled. 104,000 young Indians had turned up. While returning, 43 of them died traveling on the head of the trains. And then I told those who were coming in the way that unless and until we address this larger issue of creating jobs and manufacturing, this country will not be able to manage the demographic dividend. Either you make it a demographic dividend or make it a demographic whirlwind. You're thinking about the youth and the future, that's what it is.
I request Prashant Bhushan to give his comments on the points. And if you can, Prashant, condense so that we can have another round of questions.
I don't want to get into a slamming match with the minister here. There were a few questions addressed to me. One was on this, which was a general question on education and healthcare. We have very, very clearly said in our Delhi manifesto, and we will be reiterating that in our national manifesto, that so far as health and education is concerned, that's primarily the responsibility of the government and the public sector. Which means, because these are things which need to be subsidized, where you have to subsidize the poor or provide healthcare, basic healthcare, and at least school education to everybody, good quality school education in good quality schools with adequate infrastructure and teachers must be provided by the government, because that the private sector is not going to do. So therefore, that has been very, very clearly stated in our Delhi manifesto, that was being implemented in the 49 days that the Delhi government lasted, and that will certainly be the prime focus or one of the prime focuses of our agenda. When I say that we want to encourage private enterprise, it does not mean that we want to privatize or leave healthcare and education entirely to private hands. What I mean is that we are not against private enterprise or private businesses as such. We feel that private enterprise and private businesses can be there. There can be private schools and private hospitals also. But those private schools and hospitals, we are conscious, are by and large not going to provide education and health care to the poor or to the common people of this country, because the poor of this country need to be subsidized by way of education and health care. And therefore that has to be done by the government. That's the obligation of the government, and we are totally committed to ensuring that that would be done on a priority, that at least 6% of the GDP would be spent on education, 2% of the GDP would be spent on healthcare, etc. Secondly, the other question was, how will we create jobs? As I said, we are not against private business or private enterprise. We feel that businesses and enterprise need to be encouraged. Of course, not at the cost of the environment, not at the cost of the poorer sections of society, the common people of the country. But in general, they need to be encouraged. And therefore, we are saying that this red tape or the Inspector Raj, which is still strangulating. Unfortunately, this liberalization, which was meant to eliminate this, did not end up doing that. Instead, liberalization came to mean only privatization, indiscriminate privatization, including privatization of natural monopolies. Mr. Anand Sharma said that of course we are against monopolies. Then why have you allowed and even encouraged natural monopolies by way of electricity distribution, water distribution to be privatized? These are natural monopolies. They cannot be anything else than monopolies. But you have encouraged it across the country, you have encouraged it. Secondly, control over natural resources of this country. It's all very good to say that no, private investment is required, etc. You are digging up the natural wealth of this country and just selling it away. You are giving it for absolutely nothing. Nothing is being charged. This policy of just giving away oil, gas, this minerals, land, virtually for free. Today you have a policy where you have allowed, in the guise of public-private partnerships for building highways, etc. I know because I have dealt with this. This Agra Expressway, 6,000 hectares of land has been given to this JP Industries for making the highway. In addition to that, 25,000 hectares of land has been given away to them, and this is a pattern which we are seeing across the country. In Bangalore, on this nice corridor, same thing. Everywhere we are seeing the same pattern. 25,000 hectares is given to that company for just commercialization. You snatch that land from the farmers, give it for a song to these private companies and allow them to have a huge bonanza. Same thing has happened in the name of these special economic zones. Just loot of public resources. This we will certainly not allow. Just in the name of liberalization, everything, this completely rampant privatization that has been allowed to go on, privatizing our own resources, privatizing natural monopolies, everything has happened. Now, one question was about Swaraj and how do we protect the interests of the Dalits, etc. If we allow decentralized direct democracy by way of Swaraj, then how do we protect the interests of the depressed sections or the minorities there? This is a legitimate question. So for that, firstly, if the Dalits are in a majority in a particular area, and if you are leaving decision making to the local area, to the village, by a democratic process, by direct democracy, then in our view, that will empower those depressed sections of society there, because they know that they can, by their majority vote, they can decide what will be done or what will not be done in their area. However, there is certainly an issue regarding protecting the minorities. If there is oppression of minorities by way of the majority taking a decision in a way to discriminate against a clear section of minorities, against a determinate section of minorities, then resort can be had to a body or a commission which will be created for this very purpose. That is, if in a particular Gram Sabha or Mohalla Sabha you find that the minorities are being oppressed, just as in the Companies Act, the minority shareholders, if they are being unfairly oppressed by the majority shareholders and their interests are being sacrificed by the majority, then they can go to the High Court under a section of the Companies Act called Section 397, which is for oppression of minority shareholders. Same way, if there is patent discrimination against the minorities being done by a majority in a Gram Sabha or Mohalla Sabha, etc., then they can have resort to that commission. By and large, this idea of Swaraj or decentralized direct democracy will be not only empowering, it will be more democratic, and it will allow resources to be allocated, economic decisions to be made in a manner that resources are allocated where they are really required, rather than everything being centralized and being decided at the top by way of this indirect democracy, which eventually leads to cronyism. Today, this kind of representative democracy, unfortunately, you see, it's all very well for parties to make their manifestos and release their manifestos. You ask their leaders whether they have read their manifestos, majority of them will say that they have not. You ask them at the end of 5 years, how much of your manifesto did you implement? You find that most of it has not been implemented. Because eventually, policy making and decision making in these governments, the way that they have been functioning, has been hijacked by these crony capitalists, which you see very evidently if you listen to the Radia. If you listen to the Radia tape, the thing that comes across is that today there are these large corporates who are sitting on top of the entire decision making or power structure of this country, who are controlling these political parties and all our instrumentalities of decision making like puppets. And whether it is economic decisions, economic policies, any other policies, everything by and large is being guided, dictated, influenced by these very, very powerful corporates. And that is why I find that when this largest scam in this country takes place under our very nose, that is increasing the gas price from 420 to 840, which according to the government itself, according to the Ministry of Fertilizer, Power, Finance, is going to have a horrendous, disastrous effect on our economy and on the people of this country. Yet this completely anti-people destructive decision has been taken by this government on the eve of elections, and no opposition party has said a word about it. The question that I want to ask Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman is, why has the BJP not said anything? We asked them repeatedly. We asked the BJP leadership, Mr. Modi, repeatedly, what do you have to say about this gas price hike? Do you agree with this gas price hike? Because Mr. Modi's own Gujarat State Petroleum Corporation, owned by the Gujarat government, had asked for not just $8, had asked that the gas price be increased to $14, which would have meant that not merely 54,000 crores go out of the pockets of the people into the pockets of this one company, Reliance, but almost 1 lakh crores goes out of the pockets of the people into the pockets of this one company, Reliance. This is the kind of
I was about to leave, and Prashant Bhushan was kind enough, and I believed him, that he does not want a standing match. I can debate with him through the night as long as he wants. Unfortunately, I have a commitment. But just to correct him on facts, so that you know, first, every policy, according to him, is dictated to by a few big business houses. I will say no. The biggest policy, sorry, I'm answering. Don't use this word. Be correct in using your language. Be correct in using language. See, I'm requesting you. I gave you the National Manufacturing Policy rollout, which is a landmark and historic policy rollout. If anybody is trying to tell me that we were influenced, I'll have only contempt for that insinuation, and I will reject it as a man of truth and courage. I'm not going to take it that every policy which we make is because of some maligning intent and consideration. That's what I was questioning and warning. Second thing, it's not a question of government taking a decision on the eve of the election. Prashant Bhushan, you are wrong. This decision was taken by the cabinet. No, allow me. Please. Wrong is not an abusive word. I understand English language. If somebody is wrong, I'll say wrong. He reserves the right to say wrong. Everybody is not right, everybody is not wrong. Now, there is a committee because this matter is sub judice, and he knows and I know, and most of you. So I can't comment beyond that. Let the Supreme Court take a view. There was a committee which was set up, headed by one gentleman who is much respected in India, former RBI governor called Dr. Rangarajan. Rangarajan committee had experts, and Rangarajan committee went into the details. This decision was first taken in the month of August, revisited by the government again. There were 3 formulas which were discussed by that committee, not by the government. On evacuation, investment, as well as the pricing, including the pipelines and all. There is one US formula called the Henry Hub formula. There is a second formula called the NBP of UK. That's the national balancing point. And I'm just calling for my recall from what note came to the cabinet, because we are meant to leave that note on the table, because these are secret documents. No, listen, now it is in the court. That's a separate issue, Mr. Prashad Bhushan. But I'm not in the business of stealing cabinet notes. So I'm just telling you from my recall. The third is the Japanese crude mix. So it was a weighted aggregate of the 3. The cabinet did not add a comma, full stop or semicolon to the Rangarajan committee recommendations. I gave you the figures in my opening statement, 184 billion, the import bill. Only one thing which the Cabinet Minister for Finance told the meeting was that we can say no, and the option is to continue importing. Is again, I must correct on facts, is the state, it is the ONGC, and it is the British Petroleum. It's not one Indian company as part of the consortium. It is not one entity, and the option before India was to continue importing, Mr. Prashant Bhushan, and the lowest cost of gas price for import from Oman is $15. If you can get it to me for $2, I'll salute you. Thank you.
Minister has to go, so thanks to. Just a minute, please. Now it's turn of Nirmala Sitharaman to answer the questions.
And there was only one question asked of me, I think, if I recollect, because we've had a long session of hearing 2 of the most important parties. And on that one question, my answer is, much before we refer to the growth being a fallout of the good work done by the NDA, Mr. P. Chidambaram, in his economic survey presented to the Parliament in 2004, very clearly, even in the very beginning, in the introductory remark, says the cost of the work which was done by the previous regime, and also the levels of growth and achievements in every sector of the economy is in a buoyant mood. So it's not just us. It's certainly something which the permanent executive, which is helping the government to run its business, has put on record. So, cynicism apart, the facts are laid in the economic survey, whether you credit it to the NDA or not. The government has credited it to the NDA.
Okay. Mr. Sen.
I have just a few points to respond on the questions made, and also the submission made by my colleague panelists. Number one, one question remains. When I talk about freebies in the form of incentive to the business world and corporates, these are all figures, government figures. And 5 lakh crore freebie revenue foregone in 1 year means half of your budget amount. Your budget is around 11 to 12 lakh crore, almost half of your budget, total budget size. And even after that, all concessions are taken into account. Whatever tax has fallen due, particularly direct tax. In indirect tax, there is no scope of evasion because common people pay that whenever they purchase anything. So the direct tax, corporate tax and income tax, that remains uncollected after calculating, after taking into account all the concessions, it remains uncollected to the tune of last year 5.1 lakh crore. Year before last it was 4.82 lakh crore. Year before last it was 3.75 lakh crore. Uncollected. It is increasing gradually, proving thereby, substantiating thereby that this not collecting the due taxes is a part of the whole economic management or the machinations of the national economy. However, in whatever manner you can look into that. A government daily lamenting on fiscal deficit, daily lamenting on resource crunch, should they afford this kind of pilferage in the national exchequer? And it's a joint venture, I must say. The sentence I have just put before you, I uttered the same word while taking part in the budget debate in the parliament also, in Rajya Sabha. Why this pilferage, rather incomplicity from the national exchequer? A country suffering seriously of fiscal deficit, definitely that is a concern. Cannot allow. And that's why the whole economic paradigm is a transfer from millions of people to the handful. This distortion needs to be changed. Second point on manufacturing policy, what we did, Honorable Minister has gone. Because anyway, we have conveyed our idea in writing to him. And as a trade unionist on the national manufacturing policy, the Labour Ministry called to get the opinion of all the trade unions. As representing a CITU, I have attended that meeting there also. That your manufacturing need to be given thrust, there is no debate on it. That is the only sustainable employment generator. But the thing is that in the name of NINJ, what is being planned is to expand it as another SEZ, special economic zone, in a bigger way, with bigger concessions. And the point is that there will be no right to the workers to organize and agitate. So a SEZ on a different form is put in motion, and they are claiming that that is the real allurement for the investors to come if they are allowed to suppress labor, suppress the wage rate, and that is what is happening last 3 decades. Number 3, one thing, Prashant, he has expressed his anxiety about the Inspector Raj. But let me tell you, I know how much you are aware about the workplace situation. Practically there is no inspector now. And as a result, statutory minimum wage, workers are being denied of the statutory minimum wage. This is a lawful wage. Paying below that is an offense. People can be prosecuted for that. But who will catch hold of them? Unless government gives a report, Labour Ministry cannot prosecute. And it is the duty of the inspectors to gather that report on the basis of a complaint. There is no inspector now. Most of the posts are lying vacant. And as a result, the workers who are actually creating GDP for the country, revenue for the national exchequer, and also profit for the employers are the worst victim. And that explains also another process of transfer. Last issue on this gas thing. Now let me tell you, from 2006 December I have been raising that issue. It starts from giving that encourage to Reliance. Reliance has submitted a field development plan of $2.4 billion for producing 40 units of gas per day. Within 30 days, he changed his field development plan that he will be producing 80 units per day, but the cost is $8 billion. A normal sense of economics of scale, cannot allow such kind of a cost proposition. But within 33 days, that field development plan was approved by the Petroleum Ministry, Director General of Hydrocarbons. The scandal starts from there. Second round, when they have demanded a price, higher price for gas, the same Reliance company, in response to a tender floated by NTPC for its Kawas and Gandhar project, has committed for delivering 12 units gas per day at a price of $2.32. Subsequently, they went back because they have people in the corridors of power. They demanded a price of 4.32 to the government, not to NTPC. After quoting them, lawyers, they have been awarded the contract. They have been issued the letter of intent. Thereafter, they went back. I don't know, still court cases going on, NTPC has gone to court. And during that material time, government's own company's court case that has been betrayed, the government allowed a price of $4.2 billion. What is the formula? It is a weighted average of the price, international price of the crude oil. For the natural gas we are producing below on our own soil. It is understandable that you are charging an import parity price for petroleum because 70% of your requirement you are importing. Even then this formula is not correct. The manner they are charging on petroleum. If even at today's rupee price it is converted, the petroleum price should have been much less than what is being charged now. But I am not going into that. It is the tax burden that makes the price high. But here, this thing we are producing in our own soil, with our own people. Maybe we are purchasing technology. For that cost will be booked on some other head. And after taking care of all the costs, you get a reasonable return. And then fix the price. But no, price fixation as per the international price of crude oil prevailing in the market when it was 4.2. Thereafter, even that price did not satisfy. After 2 years, they again demanded a premature increase in the gas price because that price was fixed for up to 2014 at 2009. They demanded a premature rise in that price and started scaling down their production. Petroleum Ministry appointed an expert committee to go into the issue. Why the production is not there? Because they are telling geological complexity. When it was discovered that committee was appointed, that committee submitted its report within 6 months to the Petroleum Ministry. And they told that as per the field development plan, the company, the contractor for Reliance has committed to dig a number of wells, but they have not even dug half the wells. And because of that, at technical time, they told that the water from the neighboring well has encroached upon the existing well and led to blockade in production. So it was deliberately created by the contractor and now blackmailing the government for the price rise. In that process, Rangarajan committee was appointed. They have given a verdict, and again, what is the verdict? The gas produced in Indian soil, but that price will not be determined by the cost of producing that gas. The price will be determined by the average of the three gas selling hub, and they happen to be the most costliest hub. Now he is telling Oman is one center where $15 gas is being produced. But why should we pay $15? Our cost is much less. In response to the queries in the Petroleum Standing Committee, of which I am a member, the ONGC, Reliance, could not be called because they are son-in-law of the government. So, at least ONGC quoted, we asked, what is your cost? Offshore production. They told that it is around $3.8 per unit production cost in the offshore. Because KG-D6, they are offshore in the water. not on the soil. So this offshore, that price is $3.75. Add the inflation factor in these 2 years. Even then it cannot go to $14. But with the average of this international price, so we are producing in our own. And this is also another important aspect of these neoliberal policies, that you will produce, ultimately the production will be offloaded to the private companies, as is happening for the fertilizers. All the leading fertilizer companies, that is 7 public sector companies, closed down. Some are operating. Now you are planning to make fertilizer price on an import parity basis, so that the private producers earn a fortune. Similarly, this gas price, this is the whole story about it, I think. And we have been raising that every aspect of the issue. Since 2006 December, only we received acknowledgement. Because the whole policy, I don't blame any particular person on it, because the whole design of the policy paradigm is, it is inevitable that this is going to happen. And there will be rent seekers in the economy out of the natural resources who will be promoted. So I think on these also, we are told, it is fact, whatever Rangarajan committee has suggested, because as a committee member I have gone through that report, we had access to that. The thing is that it is fact, whatever he suggested, cabinet has not changed a lot, but C. Rangarajan was the chief financial advisor of the Prime Minister. So he recommended in a manner what he should recommend. There is nothing new in it. It's a part of the same system. It is important that this is one of the examples that important this system must undergo a change. Otherwise, there is no saving from that situation. And the whole country will be in a serious jeopardy. That is what I understand about the whole.
Thank you. I think Mr. T.P. Tripathi. Okay, thank you.
There are 2 questions, so it's very brief. Like Jacob said, brevity is the elder sister of wisdom. So I promise you brevity, not wisdom maybe. 2 questions. One is on Maharashtra. That some areas get all the facilities, some communities get all the facilities, which I don't think is correct. There is uneven development in all parts of the country. Even within the states, there are problems. There are areas which are not very much developed. But if you compare, even Marathwada and Vidarbha, the per capita income, the human development index, on that basis, they are much more developed than many areas in UP, Bihar, Orissa, and other parts of the country. So Maharashtra had given a model of economic development to the Rashtra much earlier, not today, it was much earlier. And a social transformation had taken place there. Anyway, so that's my answer to question number 1. Second is the question about airfares. The question is very relevant and correct. How can you have 25,000 rupees fare for Ladakh, 6,000 for Sri Lanka? Praful Patel as minister had sent a proposal which was to be discussed by the cabinet for rationalization of airfares. That is a very correct question that you asked. By that time his ministry was changed. A new minister came. That was not discussed by the cabinet. That is one question which must be, the airfare rationalization is a very, very important question. And especially in the remote areas, places like Ladakh, Northeast, Lakshadweep, Andaman, you have to have these special fairs which encourage people to come and go to these areas for proper national integration. It is all very essential. I agree entirely with the question about healthcare. That's good.
So, thank you very much. I think it's now time to, I think we will close because I think people have to go. So, I'd like to propose a vote of thanks to the panel of speakers who have come here and to the audience which has braved this more than 2.5 hours here. And, it's been an interesting discussion. I don't know if anybody is convinced of anything, but nonetheless, a lot of questions are there in people's minds. These questions will continue, and that's part of the political process. Things don't necessarily get resolved. So I would like to close by thanking my Teachers Association Executive Committee members who helped a lot in this organization. Maninder Thakur, Satish Jha, who've been part of this team which has helped the students, the office of the dean, and the Karmacharis from there who helped the security and the other agencies of the university which has helped with the organization. And with that, let's give a vote of thanks to everybody. Thank you.